Welcome back. The US Treasury has frozen billions of dollars in Afghan government reserves that are deposited in the United States in bank accounts here. So, where are the Taliban officials getting the money to run Afghanistan? Gretchen Peters is an executive director of the Center on Illicit Networks and Transnational Organized Crime, or better known as CINTOC. She's a leading authority on the intersection of crime and terrorism, money laundering, and transnational crime. She says despite all of this, the Taliban have a lot of money and are really well funded right now. So to join us and to discuss this further, welcome, Gretchen.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So Gretchen, how long have you been studying the Taliban?
I covered Afghanistan as a journalist for about 11 years, working on both sides of the Durand line in Afghanistan and Pakistan. And I spent a lot of time looking at researching and reporting on the illicit activities undertaken both by the various factions of the Afghan Taliban, but also the Pakistani Taliban and other regional jihadi and extremist groups like Hizb-i-Islami and Lashkar-e-Taiba and Al-Qaeda and other groups. So, all of these groups to some extent engage in some sort of illicit activity, whether it's extortion rackets or taxing trade that happens in their areas, both gray and black market trade. And engaging in kidnapping, timber trafficking, drug smuggling, all sorts of stuff. So I've looked at this across multiple different groups.
So right now, the Taliban that are in power, what is their primary source of funding?
Well, the Taliban have multiple sources of funding, and it's important to recognize that there are multiple Talibans. There are multiple factions, including the Haqqani network, which is out of the southeastern part of Afghanistan and the border areas from Pakistan. And there's also what's known as the Quetta Shura Taliban, which operates more widely in the south and west of Afghanistan. The Taliban gets a lot of money from the opium trade in Afghanistan, both from taxing it and also trafficking drugs and also taxing and running, in some cases, drug processing plants. Other factions of the Taliban engage in timber trafficking, in artisanal mining, and they raise a huge amount of money just taxing the enormous amount of trade that goes, regional transit trade that comes through Afghanistan, goods that are coming in from Pakistan's Makran coast and trucked up to the border between Afghanistan and Pakistan, and then up into Central Asia and parts of southern Russia.
Speaking on Tuesday at their first press conference since taking power, Zabihullah Mujahid, the Taliban spokesman, promised that the new government would not turn into the world's leading producer of opium, and essentially Afghanistan would not be a narco-state. What do you make of this statement?
Well, Afghanistan already is the world's largest producer of opium, so the Taliban will have a tough time making that change anytime in the near future. The country is incredibly dependent, and farmers across the country are incredibly dependent on the opium trade to survive. So I don't think that they'll be able to get rid of it. In the past, back in 2000, when the Taliban were last in power, they did successfully impose a ban on farmers growing poppy, but they continued nonetheless to allow processed opium, to be exported from the country, and they taxed it and ended up making more money. So I would say the international community needs to be very wary of any promises the Taliban make about stamping out the poppy trade. That being said, the Taliban has been very effective at collecting tax from the regular transit trade, and I do believe that they'll be able to effectively continue taxing goods that come through the region.
Mm. In your book, Seeds of Terror, How Heroin is Bankrolling the Taliban and Al-Qaeda, you said that this previous ban that you just spoke about on poppy cultivation was tactical. Can you expand on that?
Yes, I believe it was tactical. The Taliban were under tremendous pressure at the time to stamp out the opium cultivation, and they stood to receive hundreds of millions of dollars in foreign aid, mainly through the United Nations, if they successfully eradicated the opium trade. However, what happened was that there had been so much poppy grown in the years leading up to the ban that they were sitting on a glut, and the prices were the bottom was falling out of the opium market. And so what we saw happen was that the Taliban banned the cultivation of poppy, but they didn't do anything to stop poppy from being exported. And so many of us who were close to what was going on were able to discover that the Taliban leadership and the Taliban coffers grew widely as a result of this ban. So we believe it to be a tactical move to improve their position in the eyes of the international community, but still quietly make a lot of money off of the drugs trade. Again, I think the international community is going to have to take anything the Taliban say about promising to ban the opium trade with a grain of salt. Another important thing to mention right now is that in a lot of parts of the world, particularly the United States, which is battling a huge problem with addiction to opioids, the problem is really driven not by heroin or opium products that have been cultivated, but synthetic products. So in fact, demand globally for traditional heroin, in a way, not these synthetic products, has gone down. And in fact, Afghanistan and the Taliban regions in recent years have become a larger player in the production of methamphetamines. So another move the Taliban couldn't pull at this point would be to make another tactical retreat from allowing Afghanistan to grow poppy, but they could still continue to produce other narcotics.
Hmm. And there has been a plead for them for international assistance for alternative crops. What have you? Another question that I actually really want to ask is: do you think this continued? There is this demonizing and dehumanizing of Taliban in international media. Much of it is, yes, they have done atrocious actions when they were last in power, but do you think this will hinder peace, lessen the way that they are trying to present a moderate version of themselves, or do you think this is all a sham?
Well, again, there's many different Taliban, and we're seeing that in the streets of Kabul and across Afghanistan today. Some units have behaved in a fashion that's relatively moderate. They have been in fact, there have been calls from some. I was speaking to Afghan officials earlier today who were saying that the negotiators for the Taliban are saying that they want to have to be part of a multi-party government, that they want to continue to let Afghans elect their leadership, but they simply want to be able to participate in politics in Afghanistan. There are other units of the Taliban that are roaming the streets of Kabul, that are operating in other parts of the country, that are being very violent and thuggish, and are essentially behaving much the same way, if not worse, than they did 20 years ago when they were in power. So I think we have to be mindful of the fact that there are, as in any party, there are people who are more moderate and people who are more extreme, and it's going to be a question of which faction of the Taliban is able to, take command of their overall organization, if you can even say that they've come back into power as one organization. There've always been many factions of the Taliban, and they do not always get along. In fact, sometimes they'll actually fight each other.
Yes, there's this banner like the Taliban, right? And so, as you're saying that there are different factions, perhaps do you think it would be a um, better journalism to identify those factions and uh, connect their actions to their actual names, rather than I'm just looking at this from a perspective from within the Muslim community, that there seems to be, there are people who want peace in Afghanistan, who want the Afghans, they are wondering if the Afghans are not in support of the Taliban, why did it fall so quickly into their hands? So there are many questions that I know our community is asking, and experts like you can help us figure some of that out. So yes, I'd really love your take on that.
Well, I think we're still learning why and piecing together why Afghanistan fell so quickly once the Americans really substantially started pulling out. And I think there were a number of factors. One appears to be that the Taliban, for months leading up to the American withdrawal, had been conducting a campaign in the countryside to bribe and threaten regional commanders and local government officials and tribes to come over to their side, essentially saying, if you we'll give you money if you peacefully accept the Taliban back into power in this area, or we will, and then issuing threats for what if they didn't accept them. So one issue was this very well orchestrated, in my opinion, very organized fashion in which the Taliban rolled across the countryside in the months leading up to the American withdrawal and really set the stage to move across the country. I've also, I mean, this is the third time since I've been in Afghanistan that the government has flipped. So I first started working there in 1996 when the Taliban was originally in power. And after 9/11, when the foreign troops started rolling in, the Taliban basically melted away, and most of the country again fell to the United States without many shots being fired. The same thing happened this time when they came back, and actually when the Taliban came into power the year before I got there, the same thing happened. It's been my experience, and I've spoken to other Afghans and Pakistani friends who have covered the region for decades, much longer than me even, and we've all come to the same conclusion. I think Afghans are not only pragmatic, but they're war weary. They don't want to fight, and they don't want to see their homes and their villages destroyed again. And so when they feel like the wind is blowing a certain way, people will start getting in line behind that. And they saw the Americans were pulling out. And while surveys and various other indications show that on the balance, the Afghans preferred the government of Ashraf Ghani over the Taliban, it wasn't like they were particularly enamored of that government. That government had been very corrupt, both under Hamid Karzai and under Ashraf Ghani. The government had failed to deliver on a lot of services that people wanted. And so I think there was a reticence to really stand up and put their lives on the line to support that government.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much for your time and for your analysis. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
We'll be right back after these messages for our next analysis segment, so stay tuned.